Hello there ladies and gentlemen, I'm Paul TX141 Walsh, welcoming you to an all new World of Warships video today on our channel. In this episode we shall be featuring the Tier 7 American destroyer known as the Mahan. In this Tier 7 match, a domination game on the map Two Brothers, we're not sailing alone, but as part of a division of 3, featuring Ilmari in his Tier 7 German cruiser known as the York, and Z in the Russian equivalent, the Shores. Now the focus of today's gameplay is going to be on our solo work, and the answer to a question that has long plagued my mind when sailing in the Mahan and in a number of my destroyers, which is, what do you do in those games in a destroyer where you cannot commit to the front line or to a standard game strategy, and you have to sit on the back line instead? Well, let's clarify where this is coming from. So typically when I play my destroyers, such as the American destroyers, I will try to act as a picket ship, being on the front line a little bit in front of my teammates to spot enemy ships and provide that lead screen of anti-aircraft battery fire and also smoke as required. If I'm in my Russian destroyers I may do the same, or alternatively I may try to sit amongst our cruisers and use the longer ranges of my 130mm cannon when you hit tier 5 upwards in order to cause good amounts of damage with the high explosive shells. Meanwhile, in Japanese destroyers, I may try to act as an independent, creeping behind enemy lines and trying to torpedo my opponents. But what if I can't actually be on that front line? What if I can't employ those strategies? Well, I found that most with the Mahan, simply because it has an interesting set of characteristics. Now let us talk about some of the negatives first, as we make our way towards the central western region at the northwest point of A, hiding behind the western island on Two Brothers. Well, one of the key negative aspects of the ship is that it is rather slow for a destroyer at its tier, being slower than its other counterparts such as the Hatsuharu and the Kiev, with top speed being only 35 knots, if not a little bit just over. As a result, this ship, whilst it is faster than cruisers and battleships, can struggle when it goes into an engagement to be able to retreat, i.e. to pull back without taking a large amount of damage, especially if a fast cruiser such as an Atlanta is close by and opening fire on it. And whilst you do have 14,100 hit points, which is quite a lot, you'll find that that health quickly dwindles down, and that is due to your large profile, whereby the ship is quite large, especially towards the bow, as we can see in terms of height. And also its detectability by sea as standard in 7.9 kilometers means it has to do quite a bit of work to get out of detection range when it has made a push. And we can see our detectability here coming to haunt us as we get spotted only as we touch the northwestern tip of A. Meanwhile, there's at least one destroyer, if not 2 or more, pressing into A out of the 4 destroyers on the enemy team. So we can already see this weakness appearing. Now the detectability of the ship when it fires goes out to 11.7 kilometers, which is identical to its firing range with its 4 127mm cannon turrets, whereby we are using the C hull here rather than the B hull, where you would retain the middle turret. Regardless, what that means is essentially you can never stealth fire on this ship unless you have advanced firing training, alternatively you are using camouflage, but that window would be absolutely tiny. With advanced firing training on your captain, your firing range goes out to 14 kilometers, which means you have a 2.3 kilometer stealth firing window, which can be used to great effect against larger ships such as battleships and even some carriers. But, moving away from advanced firing training, what about your guns in terms of their characteristics? Well, your armour piercing and your high explosive shells have the same muzzle velocity of 792 meters per second, which is not too bad, and with your very high firing arcs, what this means is you can fire over land masses such as the one in front of us here, although the shell arcs at longer distances and the long time the shell takes to get to the target with the low muzzle velocity means that hitting targets at extreme ranges can be quite difficult, and you'll need some practice before you can achieve it. Nonetheless, the shells will do the damage, with 5% fire chance on your high explosive rounds being made up for your 4-second reload time, meaning that you will set fires through attrition, i.e. a large number of shots, rather than just one shot hitting and causing that fire. On top of this, with your armour piercing shells you can penetrate and citadel enemy cruisers, or the majority of the ones you will face at your tier, at distances of 7 kilometers or less quite reliably, although the more heavily armoured cruisers may take a little bit of a closer distance to citadel. But when you do citadel them, you'll do 2,100 damage per shot with armour piercing. So, moving away from the gun batteries then, what about your torpedoes, as we're going to try and fire some off here towards the enemy New Mexico that is lazily drifting itself along the western side of A? Well, they have some pros and they have some cons. A 9.2 kilometer torpedo firing range is a pro. But on the counter side, these torpedoes have a 55 knot speed, which means they take a long time to get to target, as we will see here. And as a result, they're more of area denial torpedoes than torpedoes that you can use in a pinch to try and rip apart enemy ships. Simply because the low torpedo speed means that on a number of occasions, even at closer ranges, you will find some of the less manoeuvrable ships being able to dodge your torpedoes. But on another plus side, you have 3 quadruple torpedo tubes, one down the centre line and then one to each side, which means that when you do fire off a set of torpedoes down one side, you will always have a spare set, as long as you take into account your reload time of 1 minute and 25 seconds, quite a long one. But just as long, if not a little bit shorter perhaps, than the likes of the Kiev at your tier. Now, moving away from torpedoes, we have sat back for the majority of this game, and that is because of the characteristics of the ship, and I feel that sometimes it needs to be played in 1 versus 1 engagements, or engagements where you can use tactics in destroyers to your advantage. And that is what we're going to do here as an opportunity appears and an enemy York has made its way down the middle of the map, a very risky manoeuvre, towards B. Now they have charged into B but put themselves on the edge for the time being. They're going to try and retreat back into the valley because we're open fire on them. They may have beached themselves, we're not sure. Perhaps they were just trying to sit there on a broadside and hopefully pick off a destroyer that would come rushing towards them. But instead, we have engaged them at long range and picked up a number of defends here. 6 defends. Now, as we head behind a landmass, we are anticipating that the York will charge forward, because the only ship they will have seen trying to defend B will have been us, and they may think with their heavy armour and good guns that they can press forward and essentially intimidate us into moving away. But we are going to use our smoke against them. Now, we deploy our smoke screen knowing that the York has just entered B and is pressing into it. We would assume they would be doing that. As the smoke appears, we are going to increase our speed and move out of our smoke, only for a brief period, and then we'll bring our speed back down. We want the York to fire because we have a carrier up in the northwestern corner, constantly ferrying planes back and forth across the York's trajectory, and on top of that we also have a Minakaze behind us. So we do exactly that. We creep out of our smoke screen, fire 1 salve off, getting some hits, and then the York opens fire, trying to predict that we carry our momentum through in our smoke screen. And with their broadside available, we dump armour piercing into them time and time again. And even with their armour, we're going to take off huge chunks of health, as you're going to see. Now what this means is, in the mental state of the York right now, if they cannot calm themselves to stop firing, every time they fire to try and guess where we are on our smoke screen, and notice how we're continually reversing, then moving forward and then reversing again, they are just going to keep themselves spotted and we're not going to have to do any work. Our Minakaze is sailing away from B right now and may not have a clear line of sight, but because they keep firing, their detectability range is just going to increase. They're never going to remain concealed, and now that a set of torpedo bombers are making their way over from our carrier, we have done the job because the torpedo bombers now will spot for us, and we don't need to move out of our smoke screen, even with the York having stopped firing, and we can just tear chunks out to them with armour piercing, 1733, 2079, and now that the torpedo bombers are here, they will finish the job for us. So we've knocked out a good amount of health from the enemy York, and also picked up what is 20 base defend ribbons, and they get dispatched by our carrier. So holding back was not all that bad, and with the York's limited torpedo range of 6 km, it means we do not have to worry about those torpedoes, which were launched at a distance of 6.3 km from us. So, in the meantime, what has this holding back caused to happen on the western side? Well, what it has meant is our buddies in our division, and indeed our friendly New Mexico, our friendly Budiani, and also our Minakaze to an extent, have all had to play the flank by themselves. Now if we exclude the Minakaze for a second, let's just think about it. Cruisers have had to screen for a battleship. Now this should not normally happen. A destroyer should be screening for the cruisers, who then sit with the battleship, if not slightly in front of it, depending on their ranges. Just a generalisation. I'm not 100% correct obviously. But we should be at the front of this, and as a result what it means is a set of enemy destroyers, 3 of them, a Farragut, a Hatsuharu and a Minakaze, have essentially been able to press forward and really be aggressive. And also a New Mexico, the one from earlier, has been able to charge forward, and with its limited health, as we'll see very shortly, will actually ram into our friendly New Mexico, and despite only having 1217 health, pick up a free kill in the process of the collision. There you go. Well played to them. So now Ilmari is on the front line, having to detect, or at least wither the storm from enemy destroyers in his York. Not the most ideal setup, and he is between islands as well, which makes it even harder. So we're going to try and bait the attention back towards A by starting to capture it. Now with our high detectability, and while the hesitations for us charging forward in the first instance, we're essentially going to try and make sure we get spotted. We want one destroyer to just drift their way towards A, because as you can see, we will be detected before any of the enemy destroyers actually get into A. And it happens right there. The Hatsuhara has spotted us. The only reason we can see them is because they are close enough to Ilmari's York. The Minakaze is charging towards Ilmari in the time being, and the Farragut will be shortly if I remember correctly as well. But we managed to pull one destroyer back. Not most ideal, but at least we've done something. 1/3 of our mission accomplished. And in the meantime, the Hatsuhara has now turned into A, is on the edge of A, the western edge, but will turn out very shortly, perhaps through hesitation of our guns opening up once again, or our torpedoes making their way over. Perhaps they think we'll fire off our torpedoes, but we're going to hold them back because we know their velocity is very poor. And it means we're able to capture A. And in the meantime, we're continuing to keep the interest of at least the Hatsuhara, who is now going to try and creep back into A in our wake. Now in the meantime, the Minakaze gets eliminated by Ilmari, and he's having to dodge more torpedoes. And we're now between Ilmari, Z, and the enemy carrier, and we're also baiting back a Farragut. They have decided to pull back as well. So we have actually done our job of baiting back 2 enemy destroyers now. The Farragut with very little health decides to sail on a straight line, meaning that Ilmari was able to use his guns to eliminate them, and we open fire of our defensive AA consumable here, trying to take the attention of the enemy dive bombers towards us, because we have the health to absorb it. Unfortunately, whilst we take down one enemy dive bomber, it is not enough, and it means they're all going to make their way towards Ilmari, and perhaps even Zauron. And we can see that both of our colleagues are on very low health here, with Ilmari being surrounded by torpedoes once again and finally succumbing to one. Rather unfortunate, and it would appear as though, at the same time, Z is having to contest a set of dive bombers coming towards him at the moment. We failed our teammates in a way there. But we decide to play our way and we have to press on. So now, the enemy Hatsuhara has come towards A and is capturing it. In the meantime, we want to pull them further and further away from Z. So the way we're going to do that, we're just going to sail into C. The Hatsuhara is the only enemy ship really remaining. In fact, they are the only enemy ship remaining now other than the carrier. And as we can see here, they get spotted briefly by our carrier's fighters, and we can see they're sitting in a smokescreen on the southern edge of A. So we pulled them back quite a distance, from going after Zauron and Ilmari. As we sit here, we're going to sit in a quite exposed position, so that way if the Hatsuhara comes charging towards us and sees us before we see them, although it is highly unlikely now considering the distance we are away from A, and indeed being on the northwestern tip of C, it means they would open fire and be quite confident in their position. And at the same time we'd be able to open fire in return and it'd be a straightforward engagement. But it appears as though the Hatsuhara is waiting, or just taking their time, perhaps hiding behind their smokescreen waiting until we have captured the zone, perhaps thinking that we would pull back towards our friendly ships over on the eastern side, but instead we're heading straight back to A and we're going to contest them. So we would presume they're going to come off to our port side, i.e. the left hand side of the island in front of us. Waiting to see if our assumption pays dividends. Come on. Will it do? And there we go. Guessed where they would come from, and we only need one high explosive salvo to take them out. Our first and only kill for this game, and we're assuming that a set of torpedoes were fired because the Hatsuhara did not open fire their main batteries and could have done a lot of damage with high explosive in the meantime. So we just wait, there's the torpedoes, and we dodge them quite easily, taking our time, before making our way back into A at this point. And at the same time, Z is now making his way onto A as well, so we will share this final cap. I've already picked up 2 caps, 3 caps would be a little bit greedy. And using our advanced firing training now, we can actually drop some shells onto the enemy hero, the enemy carrier, and do a little bit of damage. But notice how, unless we train in our shots and range in very well, alternatively just concentrate rather than worrying about heading towards A, our shells are not going to hit the majority of the time. And I believe that enemy carrier is quite a manoeuvrable one as well, as we do hit with 4 high explosive rounds, most likely in our final salvo. They are still in range. We're now setting up our smoke screen here, so that way if Zauron wants to rush down between the 2 islands where we've just come from, they have the capacity to do so. Or sorry, I should say he has the capacity to do so. And we throw a couple more high explosive shells towards the hero as they make their way away. But as we can see, the enemy carrier is focused on surviving to another day and has sent all of their bombers towards our fleet in the east rather than going to try and finish off myself and Z. And the cap is gradually coming into our hands at the moment as we share it. Hold on. And there we go, an assisted capture. And now the enemy carrier has disappeared. They've moved out of detectability, and as a result we're not going to get to finish them. We're just going to have to wait for the points to reach 1,000 for our team, and that way we will win the match. But still, quite a stealthy one we've played, or at least a rather laid back one we should say, and it has worked for us, as we now pick up 1,000 points. Hold on, there we go, and it's time for us to take a look at the post-game stats. Whilst it was quite a lazy victory, nonetheless we were rewarded quite handsomely, picking up 257,511 silver credits, 4,547 experience, and in terms of our battle performance, we dealt 24,518 damage, picked up 70 target hits for our main batteries, 1 plane shot down, 1 enemy ship destroyed, 20 base defend ribbons, 2 bases captured, and 1 assisted capture. Looking at the team scores, we can see that we came first in terms of base experience earned, picking up 3,031, quite a significant margin over second place in our team, and this was largely due to our base defense and base capture ribbons. Looking at our detailed report, we have 2 items to note here. The primary one is in terms of the damage we dealt, whereby 80% of it can be attributed to the enemy York that tried to press on to B. We took off 19,477 of their health pool and made sure to use the right rounds at the right time to do the maximum possible damage, dealing 15,319 with armour piercing when we opened fire on their exposed broadside, making sure to aim towards the bow for maximum effect. The second item, not as important, more of a reiteration, is in terms of our torpedo usage. We fired 20 torpedoes but none of them hit, and this just goes to show how we used our torpedoes for area denial, especially when trying to prevent the enemy ships from being aggressive through A, and instead they had to go around the western side of A as a result. And finally, coming on to credits and XP, we can see that after deductions we walked away with 241,604 silver credits. In conclusion, what can we take away from today? Well, sometimes it pays dividends to have a slow start in your destroyer. We saw that in our Mahan today, whereby we did not feel too confident in our ship's capabilities in order to make an early push or alternatively support our teammates from the front at the start of the match. We held back and waited for an opportunity, and one soon appeared in the form of a York that overextended onto our local objective. We managed to hold them up long enough so that a friendly carrier could eliminate them, and then we played our hand, making our way towards 2 enemy objectives and capturing them both in the process, and at the same time we managed to bait out 2 enemy destroyers towards us, turning their fire away from our exposed cruisers who we should have been picketing for from the start, and this increased our chances of survivability for our teammates. This goes to show how sometimes keeping a low profile, even less well concealed destroyers, can work to your and your team's advantage. And so I've been TX141, and if you've enjoyed this video, why not leave a like, comment or subscribe for future World of Warships videos on my channel. But until next time, ladies and gentlemen, take care and fair seas.